At that very moment, in the Prince de Guermantes' mansion, I could still hear the sound of my parents' footsteps as they accompanied Monsieur Swann back to the gate. The vibrant, metallic, interminable, shrill, light tinkling of the little bell telling me that Monsieur Swann had left at last and that Mamma was going to come upstairs. I could still hear them. I could still hear those very sounds, even though they were so far away in the past. Then, thinking of all the events which necessarily came between the moment when I had heard the sounds and the Guermantes reception, I was startled to think that it was indeed that little bell which was still ringing within me, and that I was unable to alter its shrill tinkling at all, since, no longer quite remembering how the ringing died away, but wanting to learn again what it was like and listen to it properly, I had to try to cut out the sound of the conversations which the masks were holding all around me. I was obliged to go back down into myself in order to try to hear it better. In other words, this tinkling sound was still there, just as between the tinkling and the present moment was the whole of that infinitely extended past which I was unaware that I bore within me. When the bell had rung, I already existed, and since then, for me still to hear that tinkling sound, there must have been no break in continuity, and no moment when I had rested and ceased to exist, to think, to be aware of myself, because that instant in the past was still linked to me, and I could still rediscover it and return fully to it simply by going down further into myself. It was this notion of time as an integral part of our lives, of years that had passed but were still linked to us, that I now intended to bring out so boldly in my book. And it is because they contain moments from the past in this way that human bodies can do such harm to those who love them, because they contain so many memories of joys and desires which are already effaced from their own minds, but are terribly cruel for the person who is contemplating and extending in the context of time the cherished body of which he is jealous, so jealous that he wishes it to be destroyed. The point is that once the body has died, time withdraws from it, and the memories, which are so indifferent and faded, are effaced from the woman who is no more, just as they will soon be effaced from the man who is still tormented by them. They will, in the end, die when they are no longer sustained by the desire of a living body. I experienced a sense of profound fatigue as I reflected that this whole vast stretch of time had not only been uninterruptedly lived through, thought about, and secreted away by me, and that it was my life and me myself, but also that I had constantly to keep it attached to me, that it supported me, and that perched as I was on its dizzying summit, I could not move without jolting it and taking it with me. The date on which I had heard the sound of the little garden bell at Cambrai, a sound which was so far off and yet within me, was a fixed point in that vast dimension which I had been unaware I had. I felt dizzy to see so many years beneath me, yet within me, for all the world as if I were several leagues up in the air. I had just understood why the Duc de Guermantes, whom, when I had seen him sitting on a chair, I had admired him for having aged so little, although he had so many more years beneath him than I did, had, the moment he had stood up and tried to hold himself upright, wobbled about on legs that sagged like the legs of those old archbishops who have nothing solid about them except their metal cross, and who have young seminarists rushing up to them. On the barely passable summit of his 83 years, his every step had been accompanied by his trembling like a leaf, as if men were perched on living stilts that were constantly growing, were sometimes higher than bell towers, and ended up making it difficult and hazardous for them to walk, stilts from which they would all at once fall. I was alarmed that my own stilts were already so high beneath my feet. I did not feel I would still have the strength to keep this past, which was already such a long way down, and which I found it painful to bear within me, attached to me for very long. If I were at least allowed enough time to complete my book, I would certainly stamp it with the seal of time, the notion of which was so strongly exercising me at the moment. In it, I would describe human beings, even at the risk of making them seem like monstrous creatures, as occupying a place in time which would be significant but different from the very constricted place reserved for them in space. A place quite unlike that and immeasurably extended, since, like giants steeped in the years, they simultaneously touch on remote epochs through which they have lived, epochs separated by countless days in time. To greet the Duchess, she slightly bowed her fine head.